You know those people who track every dollar like it's a life or death situation? Not in a disciplined, I'm saving for retirement kind of way. I mean the people who feel a jolt of panic over a $5 coffee. The ones who reuse paper towels, leave stores empty-handed after walking around for an hour, and feel guilty for buying something they actually need. They check bank accounts too often, they replay purchases in their heads. They can afford small comforts, but spending still feels wrong somehow. And from the outside, it looks like they're just cheap, but that's usually not what's happening. What's happening is much more personal, much more painful, and for a lot of people, it started long before adulthood.
Because people who obsess over every penny are rarely just trying to save money. They're usually trying to save themselves from a feeling they may not even know how to name. It might be fear, it might be shame, it might be the memory of watching adults panic over bills, hearing arguments through thin walls, or growing up with the sense that one mistake could ruin everything. So they become careful, then very careful, then hyper-careful, and eventually, money stops feeling like a tool and starts feeling like protection.
That's why this kind of behavior can be so confusing. On paper, it looks responsible. They budget, they save, they avoid waste, they don't splurge recklessly. But inside, it doesn't feel calm. It feels tense. It feels watchful. It feels like they're always bracing for impact. And that's the part people miss. Frugality can come from peace, but penny obsession usually comes from fear. One is a choice, the other feels like survival. Most people think the person who obsesses over every penny must really love money. In reality, they often don't love money at all. They fear the absence of it. They fear what not having enough would mean, not just practically, but emotionally. No safety, no control, no dignity, no room for error. And when money starts carrying all of that emotional weight, every tiny purchase starts to feel bigger than it is. It's no longer $10, it's safety leaving your hands.
That matters because human beings don't experience losses and gains equally. Research on loss aversion shows that losses hit harder than gains feel good. In plain English, losing $20 can feel more emotionally intense than finding $20 feels exciting. So if someone already has a nervous relationship with money, spending doesn't just register as a neutral exchange, it registers as pain, a little loss, a tiny wound. And when that feeling repeats enough times, people start organizing their entire lives around avoiding it.
Now add history to that. If a person grew up around financial instability, money stops being abstract very early. It becomes atmosphere. It's in the tension at dinner. It's in the way a parent's voice changes when the rent is due. It's in the embarrassment of needing to put something back at the checkout line. It's in the lesson, spoken or unspoken, that life can get dangerous fast if you are not careful. Studies on childhood financial hardship show that money stress can leave a long shadow into adult anxiety and depression, especially when hardship is not one brief episode, but something that keeps showing up across life.
And this is where a lot of adult behavior suddenly makes sense. The person arguing with themselves over whether to buy decent shoes, the one who keeps an emergency fund and still can't relax, the one who feels guilty spending money on rest, pleasure, or convenience. They are not reacting to the present moment only. They are reacting to old emotional math, to an earlier version of life where enough could disappear overnight.
There's also something else happening. Constant money worry takes up mental space. A Princeton-led study on scarcity found that financial worries can consume so much attention that people have less mental bandwidth left for everything else. Not because they're weak, not because they are irrational, because when survival feels uncertain, the brain narrows. It zooms in, it fixates, it starts scanning for leaks. And if that pattern lasts long enough, even when the emergency is past, the scanning can remain.
So what looks like overreacting to small amounts of money is often a nervous system that never fully got the message that it is safe now.
That's why some people can make more money and still not feel secure. Their bank balance changes, but their body doesn't believe it. Their circumstances improve, therefore you'd expect them to relax. Except they don't, because security is not just a number, it's also a feeling. And feelings shaped by years of uncertainty do not disappear just because the spreadsheet looks better.
This is also why penny obsession can become strangely self-defeating. The person thinks, once I hit this savings number, I'll finally breathe. Once I have this much in the bank, I'll stop worrying. Once I know I'm covered, I'll let myself live a little. But the relief never quite arrives. The number moves, the target grows, the rules tighten. Because the real problem was never just arithmetic. It was fear looking for certainty in a world that can't fully provide it.
And people build identities around that fear without realizing it. They start seeing themselves as the responsible one, the careful one, the one who doesn't make stupid mistakes, the one who never gets caught slipping. That identity can feel strong, even admirable, but it can also become a prison. Because now, spending money doesn't just feel uncomfortable, it feels like becoming the kind of person they promised themselves they would never be. Careless, vulnerable, dependent, out of control.
That's why these habits are so emotionally loaded. The fight is never just about the purchase. It's about what the purchase means. A vacation might mean irresponsibility. A nicer couch might mean weakness. Ordering food instead of cooking might mean failure. Even generosity can feel threatening, because giving money away can stir up the same old fear that there won't be enough left when life turns on you again. So the person becomes rigid, not because they're cold, because they're scared. And here's the heartbreaking part. The people who obsess over every penny often don't get to enjoy the very thing they worked so hard to create. They may have stability, they may have savings, they may have avoided the disasters they feared, but they still live emotionally like the disaster is 5 minutes away. They deny themselves rest, they postpone joy, they mistrust pleasure, they keep waiting for permission to feel safe, and that permission never comes. Sometimes this spills into relationships in ways that are painful and hard to explain. A partner feels controlled, a child feels watched. Friends stop inviting them places because everything turns into a negotiation. And the person doing all this often feels misunderstood because in their mind, they are not trying to make life smaller. They're trying to keep life from falling apart. They're trying to prevent humiliation, dependence, chaos, or that old sick feeling of not having enough.
There's another layer too. Some people tie their self-worth to money so tightly that financial decisions stop being practical and start becoming personal. Research from the University at Buffalo found that when people base their self-esteem on financial success, they report more stress, more anxiety, more social comparison, and less sense of autonomy. Think about how brutal that is. The very thing they're using to feel secure starts making them feel less free.
So, when someone obsesses over every penny, what you're often looking at is not greed, it's emotional overprotection. It's a person who learned, somewhere along the way, that money is the wall between them and pain. And if money is the wall, then every dollar spent feels like tearing down the house with your own hands. That's why logic alone usually doesn't fix it. You can show them the numbers, you can prove they're safe, you can tell them they're doing fine. But if their body still remembers instability, the fear wins first.
And that's also why judging them as simply stingy misses the point completely. Stinginess is about not wanting to part with money. This is different. This is about what parting with money awakens inside them. It awakens helplessness, exposure, regret, vulnerability, the terror of needing help, the shame of coming up short, the old belief that one small mistake could cost too much. But here's where things get interesting. The people who begin healing this pattern usually do not start by forcing themselves to spend more. They start by understanding what the money fear is protecting. They realize the panic at the checkout line isn't really about the checkout line. The guilt after a purchase isn't really about the purchase. The obsession with tiny amounts isn't about pennies. It's about pain. Old pain, rehearsed pain, anticipated pain. And once they see that, the behavior becomes less mysterious, less shameful, more workable. Because the real shift happens when a person stops asking, "Why am I like this with money?" and starts asking, "What am I afraid will happen if I let go, even a little?" That question changes everything. Maybe the answer is, "I'm afraid I'll end up dependent." Maybe it's, "I'm afraid I'll become my parents." Maybe it's, "I'm afraid if I relax, life will punish me for it." Maybe it's, "I'm afraid there is no such thing as enough, and if that's true, then I have to stay vigilant forever." And that forever vigilance has a cost. It steals presence. It steals softness. It steals the ability to enjoy what is already here. It can make an ordinary life feel like an endless emergency drill. And over time, that kind of unrelenting stress wears people down mentally and physically. Money is one of the most common sources of stress, and chronic stress doesn't just sit quietly in the background. It affects sleep, mood, health, and the ability to recover.
So if you see yourself in this, here's what I want to say carefully. You were probably not obsessed with pennies because you were small-minded. You were probably obsessed with pennies because at some point in your life, pennies felt powerful. They meant food, rent, safety, options, dignity, breathing room. And your mind learned that if something is powerful, you watch it closely, very closely.
You're not crazy for wanting to be careful. You're not weak for feeling fear around spending. And you're not broken because security still feels slippery, even when, on paper, you should be okay. A lot of this is learned. A lot of it is emotional memory. A lot of it is your nervous system trying, in its own exhausting way, to make sure you never have to feel that old kind of helplessness again.
But there is a difference between being careful and being captive. One protects your life. The other shrinks it. One helps you build stability. The other makes stability impossible to feel. And if you've crossed that line, it does not mean you failed. It means the strategy that once protected you is now asking too much from you.
Because in the end, people who obsess over every penny are usually not trying to become rich. They're trying to become untouchable. Untouchable by fear. Untouchable by shame. Untouchable by the chaos they remember. But money can do many things. It can buy options. It can buy time. It can reduce certain kinds of pain. What it cannot do by itself is convince a wounded mind that the danger is over.
So maybe the deeper truth is this. The person who obsesses over every penny is not really fighting over pennies. They're fighting over the right to finally exhale. And maybe, just maybe, what they've needed all along was not more control, but a safer way to feel safe.